Well, hello, and welcome to episode 24 of the Bob City Podcast. My name is Nick. This episode is my interview with Ryan Cochran, the creator of the HAMB. Ryan created the HAMB, the Jalopy Journal. He runs the Garage Journal. He's a really talented guy, a really excellent writer, and someone that I have a ton of respect for. I hope you guys dig it. I had a really fun time recording this conversation. So thanks to everyone for listening, and thank you so much to Ryan for your time. Without further ado, here it is, episode 24, Ryan Cochran. Hello?
Hello?
Hey, is this Ryan?
This is me. Is this thing working?
Yeah, it looks like it. Awesome, man. Hey, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I've been really looking forward to this.
Yeah, man. I'm kind of a podcast nerd, and I've never done one. This would be cool.
Awesome, man. Well, hopefully this is a good experience for you.
Right on.
I keep sitting down to do research for this, and I keep finding myself into the same holes on the HAMB and on the Garage Journal that I used to, and I was never like super active on the HAMB. I was always there to read and get information and stuff, but I always read the blog, Jalopy Journal, and I think when I started drifting off of that onto to other forums and just other things in general, I think the Garage Journal was maybe just starting out, or I just hadn't heard of it too much. But I'm clicking through it today, and it's really like a sophisticated blog. I was watching the video of you making the BF MFT the workbench.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Yeah. Woodworking kind of turned into a hobby. My dad he woodworked quite a bit, and I never really got into it when he was doing it. And then he passed away and left me all these tools, and my wife needed cabinets or what have you. Mm-hmm. And so I just sort of started exploring it, and it's actually a lot of fun. I'm used to working on cars where you get all dirty and grimy, and this stuff is pretty cool because you can do it for 30 minutes to an hour and then go eat dinner or something, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's awesome. It's one thing that jumped out at me pretty immediately is the blogs and the forum and stuff are largely centered around traditional stuff, but you are like embracing a bunch of high tech stuff to build, at least to build this benchtop. Like I'm seeing CAD, I'm seeing like CNC, like the big gantry router, and even the little one you have there. The
Garage Journal kind of has a fairly large community of people that are into vintage tools. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of that is carryover from the Jalopy Journal. Those guys just kind of, carried over onto it, but it's never really been focused on vintage tools. We review modern tools. Most of our advertisers are modern tool companies. So at least it's funny in my shop, like if I have an option to buy a vintage tool that, I feel like it'll work just as well as a new tool, and a lot of times they work better, like table saws and band saws and drill presses. Mm-hmm. A lot of times, like the consumer level stuff from the 30s and 40s is way better than the industrial new stuff you can get now. So, a lot of that stuff, I still use old stuff. My table saw is from 1943, and my drill press and band saw and all that stuff, it's all old stuff. So that's another hobby to get into. It's a lot of fun, is restoring those old woodworking tools. I actually just finished up my table saw about a year ago. That was a 40s era tool, and that was one of the nicest restoration experience ever, because everything was just made so well and just went together how it's supposed to go together, and the tolerances are perfect, and it was fun.
Yeah, I've noticed one big thing with old tools that people don't really realize with some of the newer stuff that's designed to ship. You pay for rigidity, and with rigidity you get precision and accuracy. So those old tools with a giant cast iron frame, that doesn't really wear out with time.
Yeah, and it's heavy and it's a pain in the ass to deal with. But once it's set up where you want it set up, and it's pretty hard to beat.
Yeah, that's awesome. So as far as the higher tech sort of solutions, do you see that is there overlap with that and building more traditional cars or hot rods?
I've seen both sides. Like my brother Keith Tardell, his shop is just down the road from me, mm-hmm. and he uses a lot of old tools and old fashioned stuff. But then at the same time, he's having like this crazy flathead intake catted and machined and casted off site. And so he uses both quite a bit. I know there's lots of guys out there that are, using CAD and in their process of building cars. And then then there's Vern Tardell, who I honestly don't think he has a tool made after like 1960. So I think it's different strokes for different folks, and a lot of it I think is how they were brought up in the what they were using.
Yeah. I know a friend of mine. He has another podcast actually, Wheels of Confusion. My friend Bob, he does laser metrology, so he 3D scans big stuff. He works in aerospace now, but he was working for Rod Emery over at his Porsche place there in the desert here in California. And it's pretty interesting. Like they use a lot of traditional sheet metal tools, but when it comes to reproducing a compound curve or some crazy body line, they'd scan it, then reverse engineer it to a model, and then they'd take it from there and like print stuff and cut out the ribs and start doing the traditional metalworking.
I feel like Rod Emery's like on a different level than everybody else.
Yeah,
like he's in a different stratosphere. Some of the stuff that guy does. And just the legacy of his family and the fact that he went that direction and now he's doing Porsches is just, that dude built like a spaceship.
Yeah.
Like the Monster Energy drink, the guy that jumped out of the pod for the highest skydive ever.
Oh, the Red Bull thing.
Yeah. That dude Rod built the pod.
Oh, wow.
Which is basically a spaceship.
Yeah.
I mean, he's unbelievable. I don't know him well, but everything I see him do just beyond.
It's always interesting where people end up, like like you said, his family history is it's right there with Barris and all the other big names. I actually don't feel like they ever got as much attention as they should have. Yeah, at least when people are looking back. But it's really neat to see like I think the first time I saw one of the Emery with the Outlaws, the 356.
Yeah.
So right, I think I saw it on Top Gear or something like that, and then I worked back from there to get to the traditional custom stuff because I just hadn't seen it before. And then I found I think Winfield was working on an old Valley Customs car that was going back through there or something.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, the thing about Valley Custom is, in a way, they sort of started the more modern custom going into the 1950s. So I mean, they kind of predate Barris in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And this is a completely subjective thing, but I'm a much bigger fan of the Valley Custom cars than I am Barris cars. I like that simple, clean line. I mean, they took basically stock Detroit cars and made them look more like their concept drawings. You know what I mean? Like they were just cleaner, lower, and just simpler. And there's not a car they built I don't like. And I mean, the same goes for Rod. He just sort of carried it on. That guy, he just blows me away.
Yeah. It's also really fun to watch him do really risky stuff with super rare and expensive cars.
Yeah. Yeah. I know I'm sort of in the Porsche world, and there's this guy that was building a 964, which is like I believe they started making those in 90 to 93 or something, but it's the last of the classic 911 body style. Mm-hmm. And this guy wanted to louver the top of the curved fenders, and Rod took on the project, and like 2 days later had done these perfect row of louvers over a compound curve, and it's like, God, I don't even know where you'd begin to do that. He's just amazing.
Oh, I was going to ask one thing I was reading in some of the earlier Jalopy Journal things. You were talking about your dad, and you brought him up earlier with the woodworking. But he was it seemed like he was pretty active in racing. Is that?
Yeah, my dad grew up racing cars quite a bit, and then he went to medical school and became a doctor, and he was basically the doctor on staff for VDS Racing in Midland, Texas. Oh, and VDS Racing was ran by a guy named Franz Weiss, and Franz Weiss is the winningest IndyCar builder of all time. And so my whole childhood was going to Indy races and stuff like that. And I grew up in Midland, Texas, and there's this crazy amount of racing heritage there. There's a racetrack there that's a private racetrack called Rattlesnake Raceway, and that's where Carroll Shelby took the Cobra for its first tests. That's where all of VDS did all their testing, and I grew up racing go-karts on that little track. And so it's the amount of history that's in that little town. Jim Hall, Chaparral Racing, he's from there. That's like the sucker car, the periscope car. Jim Hall is basically, he's the guy that turned SCCA racing on its head with some of his innovations. They had to like change rules for like a decade because of all the crap he would come out and dominate with. He was the first guy to do active aerodynamics too. But all that stuff, it came from Midland, Texas, which is where I'm hesitant to say lucky enough to grow up there, but that's where I grew up. So I was around it quite a bit, which that really kind of shaped me. In fact, the way the Jalopy Journal and the HAMB all got started was I grew up around all VDS racing and all stuff and racing go-karts, and I got invited to go to racing school in Europe. And so I was 16, 17 years old, and I was in racing school, and that developed into job racing cars there. And I was in Paris, France. I was 17 or 18 years old, and ironically enough, a 34 Ford Highboy pulled up just outside a cafe, and I had no idea what it was. I didn't know it was a Ford, or I had no clue what this thing was. And I fell in love with it, and I just started researching from there. And then the next thing I knew, one of the things I did when I left to go to racing school is I promised my mom when I turned 18, I would come back and go to college. And so when I went back to go to college, that's when basically my freshman year is when I started the Jalopy Journal. And at the time, you couldn't even have images on the internet. It was just all text. And from there, I found a 38 Ford, and I didn't know how to build it. And the message board started, and basically guys from California on the message board teaching me what to do. And it was like, I mean, there was like 30 or 40 of the first 6 or 7 years. But that's kind of how it all got started. But yeah, it all from France.
Yeah, that's
weirdly
wild.
enough.
And I think it's like relatively illegal to modify cars in France too.
Yeah, I know it's a lot harder.
Yeah.
A lot harder. I spent some time with some friends in Australia, and just to see this stuff, they basically have to build a car twice to have a traditional hot rod on the road. They build it first for all the road-going tests and all the huge taillights and fenders and brakes and all the stuff that it has to do just physically to pass this test. And then once they pass the test and they get their rego, is what they call it, they go back and they take all the crap off the car and make it look right. I mean, it's crazy the stuff that, you know, people overseas have to do to participate in such a silly thing.
Yeah. I haven't had a chance to travel and check out car culture outside of California, really. In fact, that was one of the reasons I was looking to talk to someone out of state, is I feel like I've gotten a really sort of isolated view of car culture here in California. And everything that I hear about Texas is positive. I haven't heard one person that drove to the Lone Star Roundup and regretted it.
Yeah, it's a pretty good show. It's gotten huge, but it's pretty awesome. Austin is a very unique place because the car scene is really good here. And there's a lot of people and a lot of different cliques, just like anywhere else. But the weird thing, or the unique thing about Austin, is even if people don't like each other, they get along. They pretend to like each other. You know what I mean? So there's very little of that social drama that you'll see in Southern California sometimes, or things like that. It's a very laid back, friendly environment, which I think creates sort of a unique car culture here. But you interviewed Kobe, right?
Yeah.
That dude is the smartest, most just intelligent, creative. As far as like having his thumb on the pulse of the scene, that's the guy.
Oh yeah, Kobe's he's the whole thing, right? He's smart. He builds incredible cars, and he's got like a really interesting history with it. Yeah, that was really fun. I was really glad to sit down and do that.
Got so much respect for that guy.
Yeah.
I just love him, and his books are just perfect.
Yeah, definitely.
I've done a couple of books. I know how hard that is, man. He pulls it off and makes it look effortless. But yeah, you should try to get to the Roundup. It's a neat deal. Or really any time, Austin's a good place to go. Sometimes I feel like it's better to come when it's not the Roundup because there's less traffic and you can get into the Continental Club, and it's a great place to be.
Yeah. Is that one of the big like hubs? It's hard for me to figure out what's what in Texas. It's so big.
Yeah, so I mean, I would call Austin probably the hub of at least the traditional car scene. I mean, there's guys in Dallas and there's lots of guys in Houston as well. But as far as like shows and, you know, the main events of the state, I would definitely say Austin.
That's cool.
And a lot of that's due to, there's a guy here named Steve Wertheimer. He owns the Continental Club. And then he does the Lone Star Roundup with Brian Otter and Will Muntz. And those guys, they kind of started the Renaissance movement here in Austin. All great guys too. So, but it's definitely something you should experience. It's good.
Yeah, it sounds like fun. I've got some family out in Houston. I think I've spent 4 or 5 days of my life in Texas. I think it was like 100 degrees and raining, and there was lightning.
Yeah,
it was something else.
Houston's weather kills me. It's too humid there for me.
Yeah, it was nuts when I was there, middle of the summer.
I'm trying to think what else about Texas would be interesting as far as the podcast. There's also some smaller shows here and around Austin that are pretty cool. But it's just like, to me, the best thing about living in Austin is not the events at all. Mm-hmm. To me, the best thing is like hot rod breakfast once, you know, the first Sunday of every month or whatever, where there's just like 10 or 15 of you meet and eat breakfast or lunch or whatever and drive your cars.
That's cool.
So, and there's lots of that. Just about every weekend there's some little get together, which is kind of cool.
It seems like a lot of that stuff has been popping up lately. Like the cars and coffee thing is relatively big out here, and that's like a huge change from the lull that I grew up in. Like I went to high school like the early 2000s, and I feel like I was right like when the internet was coming up, and like it was the intersection of people like not taking their cars out to cruise anymore, but also there wasn't like there weren't strong online communities around yet where people could find each other. So it was like a bunch of us hanging out outside of concerts and stuff like that up here.
Yeah. I was at the Roadster show. This was 6 or 7 years ago. And it was Sunday after all the awards and stuff, and we were getting ready, like it was me and 3 other guys, and we were getting ready to leave, and as we're leaving my buddy's Roadster, the Strombergs flood. And so we all pull over and we're like beating on them with screwdriver handles and stuff, and these 2 dudes on motorcycles pull up. And you can tell they're like, crap, we missed it. The show's over. And so I guess as like a consolation prize, they start looking at my buddy's cars and they're walking around. And I'm like, man, that looks like Keanu Reeves. I started looking closer. I'm like, holy shit, that is Keanu Reeves.
Wow.
And that dude, like, he went to dinner with us. It was amazing. Like, he was the coolest guy. But like, only that could happen in California.
Yeah, that's crazy.
He was straight up just a regular guy. Huh. I don't know. I get starstruck.
Yeah, God, yeah, me too. We used to, my wife and mother-in-law used to vend at car shows and tattoo shows and stuff like that. And I like, it seemed like once a show, like, I don't know, some beatnik who was like a god to me, like Jack Rudy would come by or something. I would just freeze. Yeah. I wouldn't be able to do very good in the booth, but.
That dude intimidates me now, and I know him. Beatniks are cool. So, like Dennis McPhail, he's an artist from Wichita. It's a beatnik. He's one of my closest friends. I love that guy to death.
Yeah, man, I'm a huge fan of his art. I don't know him as a person, but yeah, he's really, really talented. In fact, I got a bunch of his stuff up on the wall in the room I'm talking to you in now. Yeah,
this was probably 25 years ago, and the Jalopy Journal and the HAMB, it was still like 30 or 40 of us, and I got a phone call in my college dorm, and he's like, it was Dennis. I didn't know who he was. He's like, hey, we're going to this car show in Arkansas. I saw you were local. You should come with us. Wow. And I'm like, right on. So I got my girlfriend, who's my wife at the time, or my girlfriend at the time, wife now. This was our first date, basically. And Dennis met us right outside Oklahoma City. And then we drove. I think it was in Arkansas where the car show was, and that was my introduction to Dennis. And he had this Galaxy, and we're driving to the show, and the Galaxy breaks down, and he's got his 2 little bitty kids with him at the time. So my girlfriend babysits the kids while we're trying to fix his wheel cylinder on his car on the side of the highway, and we've been like really close ever since. But I've been been through some adventures, countless trips to California with Dennis. Yeah, we've gotten in a lot of trouble together. He's a good dude. In fact, I have Dennis's very first tattoo.
Yeah?
It's the only tattoo I have. But like he was practicing on a grapefruit and then went to my arm. And it's literally the only tattoo I have, but he did it. And he did it. We were in Wichita, and his buddy had this. He called it the Go Away Garage, and it was like a mechanic shop during the day, and then turned into a nightclub at night. And we're upstairs in the office where he's giving me this tattoo, and like all this crazy shit just goes down while he's giving me the tattoo, and I'm like nervous and halfway passing out. I mean, it was nuts. Mitch, that was the guy's name that owned the Go Away Garage. He was a good guy too. That was fun back in the late '90s. There wasn't a lot of us into it, so we were all looked at like freaks, kind of. And I was I was freshman to senior year in college. I was full on greaser, dude. I had the haircut, the whole deal. I don't feel like there's as many young people that do it anymore. It scares me.
Yeah, you know, I can't tell. Like I'm relatively removed from the outside world right now between work and home stuff, but
yeah.
I do like the car subreddits. Like I don't know if you go on Reddit, but I think the age there is like significantly lower than I expected, and it's really interesting to see people building cars now, like people getting their first project on the road now, because they have all the information they could ever want. You've got a huge aftermarket now that you didn't 10, 20 years ago, and you've got Craigslist and eBay, and it looks like so much easier to get started now, but they're not doing with it what I would have expected. And kids are building like like 90s cars, or like the C10 trucks are really big. Yeah. And I don't see a lot of traditional hot rods, although I do see that the term rat rod has become ubiquitous enough that almost everyone knows what that means, which is good and bad, but interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, like when we first started, which makes me sound old. I'm 43, but like when back in the 90s, we didn't have all that information, and I think the biggest part is we didn't have the aftermarket. Yeah. So that forces people to build cars in a more traditional style if you're rebelling against the whole Boyd thing. And in a way, I think that helps some of the cars of the era, because, I mean, early Fords didn't have aftermarket parts for the most part, those early hot rods. Mm-hmm. So some of those cars built in that era were more casual and felt better to me. Whereas now, I mean, it used to be such a pain in the ass to get your Strombergs rebuilt. Yeah. And now you can just buy brand new ones that are way better than, an old shitty rebuilt carburetor. Yeah. And that's a bad example, because I'm thankful as hell that those Strombergs exist. But there's other parts where you're just like, man, rather than a super belt dropped axle, it would have been way cooler if you had a Dago or whatever, Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that has some of it to do, and a lot of it too is just like, man, I've got a daughter that's 14, and sometimes I don't even think she wants a car. She's fine with Ubering when she gets old enough,
Yeah.
Or what have you. And so I think it's not as big of a deal to get a car when you're a kid anymore, it seems like.
Yeah.
So American car culture in general is taking a hit there.
Yeah, that's a good point. When I was a kid, I mean, you bought a car to get away from your parents, Yeah. Because you could get to work, you could pick up your girlfriend, and you could be on your own. And I guess you don't. You have a lot of alternatives now.
Yeah, I mean, a high school kid, like when I was in high school, if you got in trouble, your parents took away your car, mm-hmm. and that was hell. Now you can take away their car and they're fine with it. If you take away their phone, that's where they freak out.
Yeah.
So that's long term. I mean, the whole thing just scares me, because it's just like I can slowly feel like all my buddies are dying, that have been around forever. And who's there to take their spot? Yeah. Like, once we're done with this, that makes me nervous. But I don't know. Like, I can remember when we first started going to like NSRA car shows or what have you, when this whole Renaissance traditional hot rod movement started. We'd make fun of the old guys in their lawn chairs, and we'd be doing burnouts, and they'd be so annoyed with us. And I just wish there was some young group out there annoying the hell out of us. You know what I mean? Like doing stuff we disapproved of. And so, I don't know. Even if it was some guy putting electric motors in 32s, I'd be cool with that. You know what I mean? There's just not much of that going around. And the price of cars, man, especially it seems like in the last year, really tanked.
Yeah.
So maybe that'll be enough to spawn more interest once the prices get lower. Because, I mean, it is. I mean, even a Model A coupe's build these days. So.
Yeah. Have you seen a difference on the HAMB with stuff like that over the past? I don't know.
I definitely think we haven't lost a lot of members, although Facebook and Instagram and stuff like that definitely affected it. But I feel like definitely the average age is older.
Yeah.
For sure. Which is awesome for content in a lot of ways, but depressing when I think about the future. So I try to foster as much as I can, like younger folks, but message boards in general, it took a huge hit with Facebook and Instagram, and I always hold out hope that people will read the terms of service of Facebook and stop using it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was actually on the board of Instagram for a very short while.
Oh wow.
It was before they got bought by Facebook, and they started ready to be acquired by Facebook, and the TOS, they changed it for like a week to a Facebook friendly TOS. And it was insane. It was like my insight into how all that works. And I got rid of my Facebook account that day, and I've never had one since. I mean, it's crazy what they collect. But young people don't care. So
yeah,
I don't think young people really use Facebook.
I don't. I've never been on it.
I think it's mostly old farts, which is crazy.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Like, there's some technology that you see it and you assume it's going to be around forever, but it turns out to only have existed for a really short period of time, like landline phones. Like, those came into existence and fell to obscurity within less than 100 years.
Yeah.
And I feel like when I was a kid, there were some like older nerd kids that I was like friends with through like movies and hanging out, and they had a bulletin board system, like an old BBS.
Yeah.
And back then, like, you get someone's phone number and you dial into it with a modem, and their computer had to be on for you to connect to it.
Yeah.
And then you could chat with people if they were directly on it at the time. And there's games and forums, and there's like a early classified thing on there, or you could spend 12 hours downloading a picture.
Yeah.
And it feels kind of weird to watch like the start of these online forums sort of, I guess, not really close, because I feel like in the comments on Instagram, or I would imagine Facebook, it's the same sort of conversations, but it is weird watching this like gap technology sort of change or fade out.
Yeah, and so many of those forums got bought by larger holding companies to put ad dollars on. And there's very few left that are independently owned. And it's mainly the ones that are still around are stuff like Jalopy Journal, McGraw's Journal, where you need sort of a longer format.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because otherwise they're obsolete in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Thank God I don't do it for the money. But I actually sold a forum about 10 years ago. I had one called the Jockey Journal, which was motorcycles.
I remember that. Huh.
Yeah, and I in college, I worked my way through college working at a motorcycle shop. Mm-hmm. And I liked building a bike. I hated riding one. And it was one of those things where don't make your hobby your work, because I got to where I hated them. Mm-hmm. And then I bought that forum with another friend of mine, or I didn't buy it, we started it together. And I did it for like 3 or 4 years, and I couldn't do it. And I sold that one, and that experience of selling it, I sold it to some Canadian company. And it was an awful experience. And after that, I was like, yeah, I'm not selling any forums. That's no fun. My career, actually, I went to school at University of Oklahoma. And then after I got out of graduate school, I moved to Kansas City and worked at an ad agency for about 4 years. And then from there, I just worked at startups. And we did a friend of mine did a startup here in Austin, and I moved here to do that startup. And we sold that after a couple of years. And after that, I was like, I don't think I want to build things to sell anymore. I'd done it so many times and the hours are so bad. And when you're done, you're left with nothing. Like, you don't feel like you actually created anything, if that makes any sense. And like, I don't know, you feel worthless in a way. And that's why I started doing the Jalopy Journal and the Garage Journal and the Forward Barn full time. Because at least I felt like I was providing a service.
That's cool. I didn't know you were doing all that full time though. That's really awesome. That's like the dream, right?
Yeah, I've been doing it full time for, I'm going to guess, 13 years.
Oh, wow.
And this is the 26th year of the Jalopy Journal.
That's crazy.
I bought the Garage Journal. I didn't start it. I bought it about 12 years ago, maybe 13 years ago. And at the time, it only had like 300 members or something. But I was building a shop at the time, and I fell in love with the forum, and the guy wanted out. And so I just sort of took it over. But that one's been a lot of fun, though. The Garage Forum, it's cool because it's such a way bigger audience, obviously, because it's guys into hot rods, guys into woodworking, guys into, all different kinds of guys. And so long as you keep them off of politics, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But man, as soon as that thing gets to politics, those people turn into animals.
Yeah. Yeah.
I literally spend half my day deleting political crap on forums.
Yeah.
And the other half I spend answering emails about what their passwords are.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, and it's like there's a link right there. Forgot your password, but yeah, that's my life.
Yeah, God, I was an admin on the Los Boulevardos forum for a while, and that's a lot of what we dealt with too. But what you were saying with politics, it's so tricky being a moderator or an administrator on a forum where you're providing a space for people to talk, and you've certainly got your own beliefs and values and morals and stuff, but it's really hard deciding like what's acceptable content, what's not acceptable content, and what do you censor? How do you think through that?
So like our biggest rule is no politics and no religion.
Mm-hmm.
That's our main rule. And a lot of times the Jalopy Journal, like, it's been around so long, and I feel like we've got our fingerprint, just our DNA basically embedded in it so much that people know.
Mm-hmm.
They don't cross the line very often. The Garage Journal is different because a lot of those members are there to build a garage, and then once their garage is, they won't be around until they have a question about a tool or something,
Mm-hmm.
And so someone will make what seems to them to be a harmless, remark about who happens to be president or, some political statement of sorts, kind of almost like under their breath. And then someone will take offense to that and they'll jump on it. And so what happens a lot of times is I'll just delete as many posts that all the posts that lean a political way in the conversation and whatnot. And then I'll get emails or private messages from both sides accusing me of being, a fascist conservative or a raging liberal. And so it's like I take it from both sides. I think the key to it, in a lot of ways, I feel like it's the key to what's going on in our country right now is no one seems to be able to have a perspective from the other side. You know what I mean? Like, understand why that person's conservative, understand why that person's liberal. Like, no one seems to be able to really put themselves in the other person's shoes, and that creates all this like strange conflict. And it's definitely been worse on the Garage Journal in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
So without getting into any political crap, it feels like there's a lot of that going on.
Sure. Maybe related to what you just said about the people will post their garage build stuff and then bounce off, where the HAMB was more of a community. Do you feel like maybe that has something to do with it? Like they don't know who they're talking to.
Really good point. Yeah. And a lot of the Jalopy Journal guys are friends in real life too. Mm-hmm. So all that stuff's hashed out and out of the way. And just like, I think about our clique here in Austin, like, dude, we have, like, I'm thinking right now, my buddy Norm, who's 77, I believe, or 76. He's kind of the godfather of Austin hot rodding, and he's like everybody's grandfather in our little hot rodding group. And he's a like 6'5" cowboy, conservative as they come. And, you know, he's best friends with Reggie Hill, who's kind of like, he's a black dude that, I mean, he's where, like, if anyone has any advice on life in general, they go to Reggie. Mm-hmm. And Reggie and Norm couldn't be any different, but they're best friends.
That's cool.
And there's a lot of that in our group, and it's awesome. But it's funny that in the hot rod world, you can see that because these people are close enough to understand what their values are despite their political beliefs, despite the religion or what have you. Mm-hmm. But if you get into an environment more like the Garage Journal, where these guys are there for a singular purpose, they're not there for the community. They're there to get something done, to get some advice or get a deal on a tool or what have you. There's no motive to have that kind of knowledge or to be deep enough into somebody else's life to understand them or have their perspective. And that shit can get pretty deep. Mm-hmm. We just about a week ago, there was a big conversation on the Garage Journal about how to get people to stop putting political comments on there, or religious comments. Mm-hmm. And like, you'd see these guys that for the past 5 years I've been deleting their posts because they're posting something political, which happens to be exact opposite of my political beliefs. But then you'll see this incredibly just well thought out post about why people shouldn't do that. I mean, it's like, damn, just stop and read what you just wrote.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's interesting for sure. And I bitch about it because it's the only part of my job I don't like. Like, the rest of my job is a dream. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've been pretty lucky. So, I mean, I guess you got to bitch about something. But yeah, there's always been weird outlier things of owning a message board. We've had people like write their suicide notes on the forum.
Wow.
And it usually happens at like, 2 or 3 a.m. And I have my phone set up where if it has a certain amount of reports, like a reported post, my phone will ring. So like 2 a.m. my phone rings. I'm freaking out thinking something's happened with my mom or what have you. And it's one of these deals. And then it becomes like, oh crap. So you got to trace the guy's IP. You got to find out where he posted it. Call the police station there, and then they have questions you can't answer, and it gets so scary and freaky. Wow. That's happened at least twice, I think 3 times. And it's stuff like that you can't imagine as like someone that runs a message board that you'd be faced with, but you are, and it's like, how the hell? I don't even know how to handle something like that. I mean, there's been weird stuff like that through the years that's interesting to talk about, but at the time, it's just absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's always freaky. So, yeah. How'd you get into podcasting?
Oh yeah. I started listening to a lot of podcasts when I was going to school, and then when I got out of school, I had like a 2-hour commute, so I was just like burning through them, and I really just got hooked on the format. Like, I grew up, my dad would put on, sports radio all the time when I was a kid. So talk radio was something I grew up with.
Yeah.
And when I was listening to, I think Mark Maron had Robert Williams on one day. And like, I was listening to him talk, and like, Mark Maron's, I think, one of the best interviewers of all time, but he didn't know what to talk to him about. And I was like sitting there in the car, just like pounding the dash, like, oh, you got to ask him about this. You got to ask him about that. It was driving me nuts. I was like, fuck, someone should start a podcast from this corner of the car world. And, just start talking to people. Like I said, I was a vendor for a long time. And so we'd show up on, setup days at car shows and meet people and like hang out and get to know them. And, not only does this, traditional hot rod or custom car or lowriding scene have like really incredible cars, but the people that build them are just as fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
So I tried to push a friend into hosting this for a while, but no one else wanted to do it. So I figured I could take it on and, figure it out as I go. So yeah, that's the.
So what podcast do you listen to?
I'll plug my buddy's podcast, even though they don't record too often. Wheels of Confusion, that's a fun one. And then Roy Boy from Kansas has a good car one. But
That guy's amazing. I didn't even know he had one. I'll be damned.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, he gets some really good guests on there. It's fun, again, listening to people outside of California.
He's a great guy.
Yeah, we chatted a little bit. He seems like a real cool dude. His 50 cars in 50 states was, like, he podcasted the whole thing. It was really, really neat.
I'll be down. I'm a podcast junkie, but until I got that message from you, I have never even thought to look for, like, hot rod podcasts. I'm like a true crime guy.
Yeah. Oh, my
like
wife
Criminal,
loves that.
Oh, man. Criminal, S-Town. Oh, my God. That's best podcast ever. This American Life, obviously. I like Radio Lab. That's cool. But, like, all those, I don't know. I mean, every day I was listening to a podcast. I've listened to 2 this morning already.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I'll have to check some of those out. That's cool. It's funny, though, that, like, I'm so into podcasts, but I'd never even thought to look. I think I'd seen, there's a comedian that has a car podcast. Can't remember his name. It was, like, one of the more popular, Adam Carolla.
Oh, yeah.
Is that his name?
Mm-hmm. The guy from Love
Live a couple of times. Yeah. But past that, I'd never even thought to look. Now I've got a rabbit hole to go down.
There's some good ones. It's kind of neat. Like, it's an interesting space to be in right now because there's really not one like major podcast that jumps out above the rest. And I like, you know, I grew up reading like punk rock zines and stuff like that. So the ones that are a little rough around the edges are familiar to me.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's the Jalopy Journal. I have a buddy that talked for years about making one, and he's a lead singer in a punk band, actually, and he has this amazing voice, but I don't think he actually ever did it. Yeah, it's cool.
It's fun. I mean, man, like this interview is a good example. The excuse to get to talk to someone that I'm really interested to hear from it's fantastic. You know, it's really fun, and I've learned a lot doing this. Like, not only like talking to people, like, I think we recorded 2-3 hours at Winfield's shop, just pulling stories out and you know, hanging out at Winfield's shop. How cool is that? And then like when you listen to yourself record these things and you go back later and you listen to what you said, you think more about how you could have said it differently. It really is it's a very unique experience. I'll say that.
I know what we should do. We should talk about people you should interview.
Sure.
I know lots of folks. Keith Tardell, one, would be hilarious.
Yeah.
Because that dude is funny. And nobody knows him, really. Who else? His dad would be pretty interesting, but probably short.
Yeah. His dad's out here, right? Is he like Santa Rosa-ish? Am I right?
Yeah, Santa Rosa.
Okay.
Yeah. Who else would be good? Oh, Bob Owens.
Okay.
He owns a junkyard in Wellington, Texas.
That's Owen Salvage, right?
Yeah. And he's just got this amazing accent. Super smart. Just crazy friendly. He'd be awesome. Dennis McPhail would be great. Who else? Brian Bass would be good, just in the sense of he's pretty media savvy. So he'd probably come prepared with like notes and shit. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
Who have you been trying to get?
You know, I've been
like,
pretty...
to me, this is interesting content to hear us talking about like who you should have on a podcast.
I've been super lucky so far. Just about everyone that I've asked has said yes at some point.
Yeah.
I'm actually, and with this new format for me, like being able to call people up. I know I've been bugging Marcy for a while, but I don't think she reads her DMs. But I would love to talk to her. Yeah,
she'd be pretty good.
Yeah,
she's like a Renaissance.
Yeah,
woman.
my mother-in-law used to vend next to her at tattoo shows back in the day. So I've heard
right on.
I've heard stories, and I met her. You know, we vended across from her at Billetproof for a few years.
She owns Billetproof now.
I saw that's gonna be really interesting. I have no idea what that's gonna be like.
Billetproof was still around. I think it's rad.
I have
Cole Foster.
Cole Foster is. I would love to talk to him. I've asked. That's one where I got like a solid maybe.
Like, I've interviewed him before in text, and he was great. But it would be really cool to like get into all the shit that went down in Japan, because he got in all that mess in Japan.
Yeah,
people would listen to that.
Yeah, I met him before. This is one of my stories where I feel like a real cool guy. Him and John Parker were out in front of this art gallery. Dead End was doing a show down there in Salinas, and Cole Foster had this stack of vintage drag racing photos, and he was like sharing them, like passing pictures around. It was cool as hell. But I was so intimidated. I just like stood there and like, whoa. I don't think I had anything interesting to say.
Yeah.
That'd be fun for sure.
I haven't talked to Cole in probably 2 years at least, but I mean, I went out with him one night in Austin and we got in a little trouble.
Yeah.
But he was always, I knew him through Rob Fortier, that would be a good interview as well. He's always been super nice to me.
Yeah, man,
I actually went to college with his ex-wife.
Wow. Small world.
Yeah. Small world. Trying to think who else would be great. People haven't heard. Kobe, to me, that's the top. You already got him.
Man, that was really cool. I felt really, 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 really fortunate for that to all work out. And the timing. Yeah. Like he was building a car up here, so it was just perfect.
Awesome. Yeah, I met Cole through Rob Fortier I think it was either the first or second time I went to Paso, and it was still in Paso.
Mm-hmm.
And I was 18 years old at the time, I think. And I got kidnapped, like literally kidnapped by a lowrider group.
Jesus.
And I'm trying to think of the name of the car club. It was like a lowrider club, all these great big dudes. And they literally kidnapped me, like that scene from American Graffiti. And they took me to a bar and got me drunk. And then they took me right outside our hotel, which was that Host Hotel right there on the square.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember there was this purple Lincoln Zephyr that they called Scrape. And I can't think of the guy's name that built it. But it was like this fiberglass 41 Lincoln Zephyr that was actually pretty hideous. And on one side it had like huge Boyd wheels, and on the other side it had sombrero hubcaps. And those dudes were like, if you go steal those hubcaps, we'll let you go. And I was like, are you serious? And they're like, we'll let you go. You got to go steal those hubcaps. And they gave me a screwdriver, and I stole the hubcaps for them, and they let me go. There you go. I committed a crime on the podcast. I was 18 years old. First time I'd ever been to Paso. It was crazy. That was the days back when Paso was still in Paso. That was an amazing show.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. It was like nothing else.
Yeah, I mean, just no matter how big it got, it didn't lose that feel.
Yeah, I was really fortunate to get to catch the tail end of that. It was so cool. Like, even just driving down to Paso, you'd start seeing the show, an hour outside of town on the freeway or on the side of the road for us most of the time.
I remember I went one year, I bought a 55 Riviera and kept it at Rob's house. Mm-hmm. And then my girlfriend, now wife, and I flew in and then drove with Rob to Paso, but we drove with the shifters.
Mm-hmm. And
it took like 15 hours to get there because everyone's car kept breaking down. I remember Anthony, like, his throttle linkage broke on his carburetors, and he ended up like tying a shoelace to the carburetor and running it through the firewall and just holding the shoelace through the firewall. It was crazy stuff like that. It was a good time. Yeah. I don't know, man. I'm sitting here thinking of fun stories to tell, but I don't feel like I'm filling much air.
That 65 Riviera, was that the one on Barani wires?
That was another one.
Okay.
My first one was more lowrider style. I bought it from Dan Collins,
mm-hmm.
which he'd be another interesting interview. And that car actually has a crate, the one I bought from Dan Collins. This is good. All right, so I bought it from Dan Collins, and then I kept it at Rob's house until we flew in and drove to Paso. And then after Paso, my girlfriend and I, now wife, drove from Paso back to Norman, Oklahoma, where I was going to school.
Mm-hmm.
And going through Death Valley, it started overheating. And by the time we got to Vegas, it was just done, man. The radiator was all swollen. And it needed a new radiator, and I had no money left at this time. I'm like 20 years old. I had my girlfriend on a road trip. The car's blowing up, and we both like call our parents. What are we gonna do? And we stayed at the Paris Hotel in Vegas. We got a room. We had enough money for one night. And my girlfriend actually won enough money playing craps to buy us an airline ticket home.
Wow.
And then we shipped the car. Once I got back to Norman, we shipped the car from the parking garage to Norman. And it had a little rust under the package tray. And so I was, cleaning up the package tray, taking the carpet out of the trunk and all that stuff to get it all cleaned up. And a brick of cocaine fell out. It was trapped between the metal bracing of the package tray and the cardboard shit that holds the package tray up. And it was literally a brick of cocaine. And it had been there, obviously, a very, very long time because it was green. And I'm like, oh, my God. And a really good friend of mine was a policeman in the Norman Police Department at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know what to do, so I just called him. And I was like, what do I do? And he's like, oh, man. So he, brings over his partner and a drug sniffing dog, the whole thing, and they go over the whole car, and that's all they find. But I'd gone through countless state lines. I'd done all this shit. And to think if I had gotten pulled over and the car searched for whatever reason, there's no way they would have bought that, hey, I just bought this car.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It obviously wasn't Dan Collins either because, it had been there for decades, right? True. It had been there for a long time. And, the police ran all these tests on it. It was cocaine. It was very, very old. And I didn't get in any trouble, but I made the right decision, amazingly, at that young age to call my buddy because it was crazy.
That's wild.
I was all worried Dan Collins was going to get in trouble. He didn't because it was so old. But yeah, at one point, some drug lord had owned that car and had that whole trunk stacked.
That's
and
crazy.
Actually left a brick. Yeah, that particular Riviera, that was always one of my favorite cars. I sold it 2 or 3 years later, and I think I've had 3 65s since then. It's one of my favorite cars ever.
It's such a great design. It's just so perfect.
That green Riviera with the Baranis on it, I loved that car.
Yeah.
I drove that car every day for a year or two. It was my daily driver. It was fantastic.
So I remember on the HAMB, I think right before the Boulevardos Forum spinoff happened, there was a lot of back and forth about whether lowriders were appropriate to be on the HAMB. And I think I remember you posting to the Jalopy Journal around that time about the Riviera. Do you remember that conversation around then?
A little bit.
Did you ever feel like lowriders weren't welcome there?
I think it's a good traditional lowriders before crazy panel painting and gold plating and stuff like that became the norm.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Barrio style early 60s lowriders to me are just customs.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
My first old car was a 64 Impala with switches.
Yeah.
13-inch Daytons. Yeah, I had a huge stereo in it.
Lowriding was really big in Texas, right?
Yeah, it was basically started in El Paso. No one in California would admit that, but the barrios of El Paso is where at least a lot of the early lowriders came from. And you can see examples of that actually in some of the mid-60s Rod and Custom magazines. Mm-hmm. They'll call them customs, but it's, some guy from just outside of El Paso with his Impala on a brake.
That's cool. Yeah, I know the tradition of cruising, they say, comes from the tradition in El Paso. What's it called? Just the Pasado, I think. Where people line the streets and dress up. People would walk down the middle and they're guys trying to meet girls. And that tradition carried over into cars in Southern California is where people say the cruising tradition came from. I don't know if it's true or not. I would imagine that cruising the main hub in your town trying to look for company is probably pretty common to the human race. But
yeah, it's interesting about just the car culture as a whole. When I think early racing, I think Southern California.
Mm-hmm.
But in fact, if you go look at Ohio in the early 1900s, people were racing Model Ts, and that's where the banger aftermarket industry started, is Ohio and Indiana. So technically, those guys were doing it really way before Southern California was. But if you look at specifically industry of the time, World War II, when hot rodding really took off, just after, you had the industrial guys on the East Coast. And so they learned their skill set working on industrial pipes and shit like that.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas on the West Coast, you had the aerospace industry, and those guys were working on aluminum aircraft riveting and, really fine-tuned, beautiful work. And so they picked up a different skill set, which led to more refined hot rods. And so I think that happened a lot in just racing in general, and that, maybe it started in Ohio and the first guys were doing it there, but once it got to California, where those guys were in the aircraft industry and they had the skill set and the tools and the knowledge to build a more refined version of whatever was going on elsewhere, they just did it better.
Yeah,
and I know, like, East Coast guys hate to hear that a lot of times, but it's true. If you look at some of the historical cars that have survived and you look at the craftsmanship, you can tell when a car was done in Southern California.
Yeah, it's kind of unique. Like, if you look at not to take this too far off, but if you look at the population of Los Angeles from like 1930 to 1950, it explodes right after World War II. And that's, like, my grandfather was a carpenter from Arizona, and he moved out to LA when he first got out of the service, and then didn't like it there and moved back to Arizona. There's just, I think the economics of that has a huge impact on everything, because people from all over the country were just shoved in this urban area for the first time together, and they've got money coming out of the war, and the industry is still cranking from switching over to supporting the war effort. So LA is sort of a geographically unique place at the end of World War II for that stuff to really explode.
Yeah, and I always think of the first time I saw Barney Navarro's Roadster, because that car's, it's been restored, but it's pretty close to how it was. And if you look at the craftsmanship on that car, there's not a whole lot of difference between that car and like what's coming out of Brizio's shop. Mm-hmm. Like, and that's not a knock at all on Brizio, because that guy's one of the best in the world. Navarro was that good. And he's gas welding and everything else, but he was just so tenacious about detail that I don't think there wasn't any of that on the East Coast. And there's some East Coast hot rods that I love. I think back to that what's that book called? Cool Cars, Square Roll Bars, or something like that. It's all East Coast hot rods. That book has so many cool cars in it. But it's really when you see survivor cars that come from either coast that you can, see the difference between what they were doing. And I've always thought in my head, I have no proof of this, and I'm probably full of shit, but I've always felt like it had a lot to do with the aircraft industry being based on the West Coast and the East Coast being, the birth of the Industrial Revolution. So it was much more industrial.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and that's beyond like the proportions of a channeled car versus a chopped car. It was craftsmanship. There's a big difference in my opinion. And you could also, like, in the 50s when IndyCar racing started getting really big, it wasn't until the West Coast guys got involved that those cars got really fast. I went to Indy. I used to go every year with my dad. In fact, I went every year I was alive until I was 15 or 16, until I started racing myself. And then I didn't go back until last year. I went with this deal. I went with Valvoline. And it was so rad to go through the museum again and just see all those historical cars I hadn't seen since I was a kid. Obviously I've been surrounded by historical hot rods for a long time, but I haven't been like an honest-to-goodness professional race car built in 1955 in a long time. And it was, you forget the standards that they were capable of back then. Pretty insane. I think Whitfield built one of those cars actually once, I think.
Probably. That guy's done everything.
Yeah, that asymmetrical car he built, holy crap, I love that car. The silver one? I can't remember what it's called. Manta Ray, is that it?
Manta Ray's Jeffries, isn't it?
Jeffries, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, man, one thing I learned from doing podcasts is my recall sucks.
Yeah, mine is awful.
Yeah, I'm a lot more forgiving when people get stuff wrong in public. But yeah, it happens.
I can tell you, like, if you tell me a car, a lot of times I can tell you the month and year of the Hot Rod magazine it was in,
Yeah.
but I cannot tell you for the life of me of who built it. You know what I mean? Like, it's weird.
You mentioned Brizio earlier, and that jogged the memory. When I was first on the ham, there was this pretty adversarial thing between traditional cars and like the billet community. In fact, Billet Proof, named after that rivalry. I've noticed now there's a lot more reverence for some of the builders, like Boyd Coddington, or like the Brizio. I'd say was certainly tied up in the billet wheels thing, at least through the 90s. Do you feel like that's changed?
I don't know if it has or not. Like, I've never been, certainly when I was young and I'd go to those NSRA events, I would be like, wow, this is boring.
Mm-hmm.
Like, all the cars look the same. They're all guards red. They all have the same Boyd wheels. And, when I first started the Jalopy Journal, I was actually working for Boyd.
Mm.
I did his website, his first one.
Huh.
And I worked for his son for a while as well. But I never looked at it so much as an us versus them once I grew older and a little bit more mature, I guess. And I can only respect like some of the stuff Chip Foose does. Mm-hmm. And I love looking at it. But like, I've never been one to even really want to own like this finely finished traditional custom or hot rod either, because I've just always been into more casual cars that you can drive and not worry about and enjoy. Mm-hmm. Whereas a car with perfect paint, like I have Lee Pratt's old shoebox, and I get so stressed out because I'm like, I'm going to screw up Lee Pratt's cars. You know what I mean?
I was watching you doing woodworking next to it on one of your videos. Like, oh my God.
Yeah. And it, like, I just got back from Louisiana, the roundup in Louisiana, and I took Lee's car, and I hit a deer on the way there.
Oh, Jesus.
And I got lucky. It didn't hurt the car bad at all, and I mostly fixed it already. But like, there's this tiny little rock chip and a little dent in the hood, and it's been just torturing me ever since. It's like, oh man, I can't do that work myself. I have to find somebody, that I trust with body work. I got some paint from Lee. You know what I mean? Like, and I love that car, and that's the only reason I own it. And that's probably the only car like that I would own, because I just don't like that stress. I just like casual cars that look fast and you can beat the hell out of without, that feeling of guilt or anxiety behind it. But to get back to what you were saying, I think there are certainly guys out there that sort of resent the billet movement, even though it's been dead for so long. And I don't really put myself in that camp. And most of the guys I know, really, they don't hate, contemporary hot rods at all. That's just not their thing. So as far as Boyd goes, he did a lot of great stuff, obviously. John Butera hated my guts, and I still respect everything that guy did. And the reason he hated my guts is because of that anti-billet movement. Because I think the ham, especially back then, was sort of almost like a pulpit for that kind of thing. But you can go back and look at all of my posts from that period. I never really got too much into that.
Yeah,
a lot of guys on the ham certainly did.
Yeah, the comparison for myself is like, there's bands like when you grow up punk rock that you have to write off because they're too cool for them. Like the Rolling Stones and the Beatles. Like, oh man, they suck when you're a kid, and you grow up. It's like I'm not a Rolling Stones fan, but they got some good stuff. Like Gimme Shelter is goddamn great, whether you like the band or not. And I feel the same way with car builders. Like when I was a kid, I was a little more adversarial, and then now growing up, it's like, man, if someone puts their heart into something, I can at least appreciate it from there. And if I can be a little, I don't know, not challenged by someone doing better work than I could ever possibly hope to do, I can appreciate that for what it is too, even if it's not my my style completely.
Yeah, I come from the same spot too, because I mean, I'm a hack in the shop. So if someone like Chip Foose builds a suppository-looking car with no, just this smooth, big-wheeled thing, I couldn't do that. Like, who am I to shit it? So, I mean, I get it. I mean, if I was Cole Foster and, there's a suppository sitting in front of me, I probably would be more prone to talk towards it, but I'm not in a position to do that, really.
Yeah.
I don't have any talent in the shop, so who am I? But there's like when you go to a car show and you see a car that's proportionally wrong and there's a lot of problems with it, but obviously the guy's very proud of it and it works hard. All my friends have code for that, and it's, man, he put a lot of work into that one.
That's like the car version of, oh, bless your heart.
Yeah, exactly. But that's one of the coolest things about Austin car people is there's not a lot of negativity in it. But you're talking about music and bands. You really do need to interview Steve Wertheimer, because the guy, he owns the Continental Club. He is deep in the world of music. Really good friends with a lot of people in the music industry. He'd be super interesting. He also owns Gary Howard cars, and that's somebody else in the Austin scene we haven't talked about is Gary Howard. He passed away a few months ago. He was really the guy that started the Austin car scene. And he did that he was from Iowa, and he was a really good body guy and a really good painter. And Jimmy Vaughn was wanting to build an early traditional custom. And he heard about Gary, and he went out there, and they sort of teamed up on their first car. And it was in every magazine back then. And that just sort of got people in Austin, took notice of that car because it was Jimmy Vaughn's, and the next thing you knew, Steve was involved, and Steve is great with people, and it just sort of took off. I basically live here with Steve, and Steve's around in the car scene because of Gary. So it sucked when Gary passed. He was such a great guy, and literally probably the best painter I've ever seen. The guy was incredible. It's weird because I still don't believe he's gone. Like when this happened with the shoebox, my first thought was, I'm going to Gary's as soon as I get home. And it's like, shit.
Yeah.
So it was a bummer. They just did a benefit for him, for his wife, 2 weekends ago in a little town outside of Austin. And I was out of town at the time, but apparently it was like one of those once-in-a-lifetime car events. Like, it was just perfect. Not a ton of people there, but enough. And all of Gary's cars were there, so it was beautiful. But, yeah, if you're not familiar with Gary Howard's cars at all, do some research. He did all of Jimmy Vaughn's cars. There's a guy here that's in our Mike Young. He started a restaurant chain called Chewy's. But he did all of Mike Young's cars as well, and they're perfect. And they range anywhere from early 50s customs to like mid 60s lowriders. Just every one of them's bitching.
Cool. Yeah, definitely know Jimmy Vaughn's cars. That's cool stuff.
But what else you got? Yeah, I'm hoping you're editing out all this dead air.
Yeah, no, like I said, I'll pull it together. I think you'll be happy with how continuous it sounds if I can do a decent job. There's been some of these where we'll pause in the middle of the interview and it'll run off to something else for a long time, and we'll come back. And it's all fine, except for every once in a while we'll make references to the marker. It's like, oh yeah, we're 2 hours into it, and my recorded podcast is like 45 minutes. It's like, oh God, what must have happened behind the scenes there? Yeah, I try not to plan too much. I try to do enough, background research so I have an idea of what I want to talk about, but I try not to make it sound like a canned interview or something like that, because those are super boring too, where it's just a Q&A. It feels like you're getting quizzed if you're being asked the questions, and you're not participating if you're the one asking them. Yeah.
I listen to Joe Rogan's podcast, not religiously, but every now and then, but I've always felt he did a pretty good job with conversational, he'll have, some of his podcasts are crazy long. But he does a really good job of he doesn't ask any hard questions, which sometimes gets frustrating, but they're always conversational, which is cool.
Yeah, I can't listen to it regularly, it's, I like probably every 20th episode that they'll put out, but the ones that I listen to are fantastic. He's really good at being curious and not judging people.
That's exactly right. Curious without judging. Yeah. Well, I'm trying to think of any other interesting tidbits I've got. My life is so boring. I'm a hermit.
I'm really appreciating it. It's, I tell you, like, my knowledge of car stuff outside of California is very limited. So hearing more about Texas is really cool.
Yeah. There's some weird old history. There's actually a 32 Cabriolet that it's owned by a car collector on the East Coast somewhere now, but it started its life in San Antonio at the Air Force Base. And there's all this like crazy drag history behind this car. Like Don Garlitz raced it and all this crap. Like I don't even know if any of it's verified. But the car is now, I've been trying to buy this car for like 15 years and he won't sell it. But it's such a bitchin' car and it's from Texas. But there's lots of little stories. Wertheimer, the guy that owns Continental Club, he has a little early roadster that's called the Waco Kid, and it's been a hot rod in Texas since the 1950s, early 50s. Unrestored. Steve still drives the hell out of it. But there's lots of... And Tweety Bird, the car that Keith Tardell just restored, that guy would be an interesting interview as well. He's older. I mean, he used to take this car. It's weird. It's the car that's in the background of like every famous hot rod photo ever, but was never in the foreground. So he went to like every car show in this car from Texas, and he was in California a lot. Went to like all the NHRA Nats, and like no one ever took a picture of Tweety Bird really, but it's always in the background. So you'll see like the Hillborn Streamliner at the Tulsa drag strip. And it's like the famous last photo of the Hillborn Streamliner ever. And in the background, hey, there's Tweety Bird. And so the car has been around forever, and Keith restored it last year. I think it's going to be out in the Rodder's Journal soon, I think. But, yeah, that's a cool little car. The Rodder's Journal and the Jalopy Journal kind of have an interesting relationship. So Steve Koonin, the guy that owns the Rodder's Journal and started it, he started the Rodder's Journal almost to the day when I started the Jalopy Journal. Wow. And I remember I went to the NHRA Nats in Oklahoma City. I was going to school in Norman, Oklahoma. And he was like introducing the Rodder's Journal at the time. And I had started the Jalopy Journal that month as well. And we're just like eyeballing each other, We're super close now. He's one of my best friends. I love that guy to death. But so we've just, it's funny because we just sort of like supported each other through the years to the point like some people think that the Jalopy Journal and the Rodder's Journal are owned by the same guy, but we're just buddies. So we've always sort of supported each other. We want to do a book together, which hopefully we'll do this year. We wanted to do one because we both just celebrated last year our 25th anniversary. So it would have been rad to have like done a book then, but he's in the middle of moving. And we couldn't get it done. But hopefully, what we want to do is like a book that features some of the old build threads of the HAMB and stuff.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, be kind of fun. He's a good dude. He's so much like me. It's crazy. We both give sort of weird initial impressions because we're both pretty shy. So we both like the people that don't know us think that we're very similar. And we're not all that similar, but we just give the same first impression. So there's always good jokes around that. I always tell Steve that, like, oh, you've only talked to him once, he probably hates you. Because he's shy, he's, like, socially awkward, and I have bad social anxiety.
Yeah.
And so, like, first impressions are often that guy's an asshole. You know what I mean? Like, he didn't say a word to me. In reality, we're, like, caught up in our own self-inadequacies. Like,
there's a lot of anxiety in the car world. It's, I don't know, we spend most of our time with our heads down looking at something that we can understand mechanically, very simply. Like, this is physics used to make something, this is the thing that it can do with that. And outside of that, we get a little lost.
Oh, I have like gnarly social anxiety. They used to, like, at car shows, they'd have like these HAMB gatherings, and people get so mad at me for not going to them. I'm like, I physically could not do it. Yeah. Like I would be throwing up. I mean, literally, there's no way I could do that. And even still, like, I love to go shoot cars, and I'll find some car I really want to shoot. In fact, this past summer, my son and I have been restoring this old travel trailer, and I decided I was going to take like a week and just drive through the middle of the country and do photo shoots of cars. And planning it, I'm all good. You know, I even know, like, I shot Nick's car in Nebraska. I know Nick pretty well. I was still so freaking nervous. Like, and then if I'm shooting some guy's car I don't know, oh God, I'm a mess. I've never handled social situations very well, and I don't know if that comes from being stuck behind a computer too much. I don't know.
Yeah, I got a weird into it. Like, I'm sure people that listen to the podcast hear me stutter and get nervous and all sorts of stuff like that. And this is like very not normal for my normal routine, like calling people cold or texting them and trying to get them to have an hour conversation.
Yeah.
But doing vending with my mother-in-law, like, even if you're like anxious and shy and nervous, you have to just like push past it somehow and talk to people and sell stuff and count change. And so I'm really grateful for those years in the swap meet, learning how to do that.
Yeah.
Even, being able to fake it a little bit, it's closer than nothing.
I'm like, when we do events like the HAMB drags or what have you, I'm like, I'll get really, really nervous on the way up there. I'll get really, really nervous the day before. And usually by noon or so, I'm fine. After I've been working for a while, everything's cool until someone says something complimentary. And then I'm like a fucking mess. Yeah.
The few times someone's mentioned the podcast out in public, I just sort of the same thing, like, huh? And then I it's this really weird feeling, like I feel a little spied on. Like, wait, you listen to me and I didn't listen to you? Like, it's the most bizarre, like, head trick. But it's like,
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yep.
Or something that I wrote, it's like, thanks. But how do you know that about me,
Yeah. Yeah. For years, I didn't allow pictures of me on the internet at all.
Yeah.
And then, in fact, I think I did a woodworking video in the Garage Journal. It was the first time, and I didn't even realize I was doing it until it was too late,
I've avoided that, too. Well, we were I had a friend come out who was taking some pictures of my wife's car, hopefully for a magazine thing. If not, I don't want to, like, oversell it. But he was shooting the license plate, like the trunk of her car, because it's got some, like, panel paint around there. And he asked, like, is it okay if we put the plate in, or should we, like, censor it, put, like, the magazine logo over it? And it's, maybe 30 years ago, someone could have pulled the plate and found out where we live. But now, like, if we're tagged in it, like, it's very, very straightforward to find out, like, whose car it is, where it came from exactly, and all that. That's changed a lot.
Yeah, it has.
Like, I think with this, even with my podcast, I've tried to make myself be more of a part of it, like, against my own instincts, because you need, like, I feel like you need a narrator, you need a driver, you need some person that's pulling the thing along.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I get way too in my head about stuff like that. Like, do you know Mike Labella? He did Gearhead magazine. He's in a couple.
Yeah,
of
that guy's a legend. Yeah, that guy's a legend.
Yeah, I feel like Gearhead, and which is going with someone else now, but the Gearhead of his era was really him. It's like his thoughts, his idea. These are the bands that he found. This is the thing that he went to, and it's really cool. Like, it's but it very very clearly had a voice at the front of it. I think just his little letter to the editor at the beginning, like, set the stage when you go through the magazine. This is the person, and then these are the things. I think sometimes it works. Although if someone just wants attention, then that doesn't work. That's a whole different thing.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I know, like, old Thrasher magazines, the same thing.
Yeah.
Whoever was the editor at the time, it was his personality through the whole book. I think Garage Journal's a lot like that too, although people don't realize it. I mean, Coonan does an editorial to start it, but just the cars he picks, I can tell, he picked it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. That's one thing that's come up with all this streaming content these days, is like there's no person making decisions. It's like an algorithm or just the luck of the draw sometimes.
Yeah.
And like a curated feed, like some of the there's like horror movie the subscription services and stuff like that, where someone's made you like a playlist of movies.
Yeah.
That's really important. I mean, it's pretty cool sometimes to be challenged by something that's not your own perspective, but where someone can make a case. Like, yeah, like Mike, I think, God, he has one episode where it's like an unlikely band with an unlikely musician and an unlikely show. It's like Together at Last, and God, I'm trying to remember what issue that is. It was cool to have someone like sort of forcing you, with their magazine or their little piece of reality to be like, these are related, and you should appreciate them, instead of just finding them randomly or through an algorithm on Instagram where it's calculating what it thinks you might like.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me, which this wasn't done with any grace or finesse at all, but a few years ago on the Jalopy Journal, I did a feature of Wertheimer's Tail Dragger Custom with my Model A Coupe with the Ferrari 575 Maranello. So like the super modern supercar with the traditional hot rod and a traditional custom, and like how the Ferrari was sort of this weird mix of the two. It went over like a lead balloon, but I always loved it, and I've tried to reproduce that. I've always wanted to do like a 32 Roadster with the Porsche 911, just because they're, in a lot of ways, they're so similar. Just the ubiquitous go fast machine. But I've always enjoyed that contrast quite a bit. Even like my woodworking stuff, this workbench I'm working on, a lot of it was inspired by Tom Sachs. And if you're unfamiliar with Tom Sachs, he's this like artist sculpture guy, and he has a fascination with NASA. And so what he'll do is he'll build certain NASA objects out of common objects. So like he'll build, I mean, he's built a space shuttle out of plywood before, and it's like half scale, like it's huge. And the way he does it, it's all plywood and resin, and just some of the stuff he does, like he'll paint a sheet of plywood before he cuts it and sands it and everything else, and then he'll put resin over the whole thing once he's finished to preserve all the scuffs and sanding marks and everything else, just to show that contrast of, NASA technology object with these like little kid like materials. I've always liked shit like that. Oddly, I've never gotten into the rat rod thing, but I guess it's not all that different somehow. I think what bothered me about the rat rod thing, and it didn't bother me because if people enjoy it, have at it. I don't care. But the reason I never focused on the Jalopy Journal was a lot of times it just seemed so effortless, like they didn't suffer for it. You know what I mean? Like when I see some guy that's worked his ass off, spending as little money as possible to make a Model A Roadster look like a Model A Roadster would have looked in 1948. To me, that like had a lot of merit behind it, and I enjoyed it way more than just throwing skull and crossbones and leaving rust and everything else. I don't know that one way is better than the other. I just know which way I like better. So I don't think that rat rod argument is very legitimate anymore. I think those sides have been chosen and everything else, and they don't really mix as much anymore. But there was a period there, like on the HAMB, where reported post every day, this guy's posting rat rods. and then you're forced to define what's a rat rod and what's not, and man, you can piss some people off doing that. So thankfully that time's come and gone.
Yeah, that's touchy. Like if this is the best that someone can do and they're working for it and it looks rough, I'm fine with that. But yeah, if you're intentionally making it look worse or sticking a bunch of I mean, it's the same stuff with the import tuner crowd. Like if you're just covering it with crap from Kragen, it's not interesting.
Yeah, yep. I'm with you. Funny side note, my wife is a Fast and the Furious fanatic.
Yeah?
Yeah. Her 40th birthday was Fast and the Furious themed. In fact, all right, so she like bought what were the two actors? Paul he passed away in a Porsche. I can't think of his name. But she got life-size cutouts of the two actors. What's the ball name? God damn.
Vin Diesel?
Yeah, Vin Diesel and Paul, the other guy, the blonde-headed guy. She got life-size cutouts of them both for her party. And we rented out this local bar, and she invited all of her friends as a private party. And at like 1 a.m., they're closing it down. and this kid comes in, and he starts like bum rushing the cardboard cutouts that I'd paid $50 for on Amazon, right? And I'd had too much to drink, so I'm pissed. And so I find myself standing up for the honor of Vin Diesel's cardboard cutout. And I've been lifetime banned from the bar because of it.
Wow.
Story of my life, man.
That's
I don't
funny.
even like Fast and Furious. I mean, I guess I do, but yeah, that's a pretty good one.
Yeah, those movies hit a weird place for me because it's the stuff that was happening around me when I was in high school or middle school. And
Yeah.
there's no debating that the shot of nitrous thing where they go through the whole engine, they show all the moving components. That's really cool.
So rad, dude. Yeah. Oh, some of the best car scenes ever in those movies, dude.
Yeah.
Even the shitty ones had good car scenes, like that one in Japan, in the parking garage. That was awesome. Or Vin Diesel, like pirouetting over, you know? That Dodge Charger, that car is actually in Dripping Springs, which is where I am right now, like the one from the movie.
Wow.
Yeah, my old neighbor owned it. I live in Dripping Springs, which is about 15 miles outside of Austin.
Mm-hmm.
And it's weird. Within, I'd say, 3 square miles of me are Jesse James, Alex Jones, which he's, yeah, the guy that started Patron Tequila, which is, I guess, Jesse's father-in-law now, and then the guy that owns the Fleshlight Company.
Wow.
It's strange. And this is it sounds like, as I go over that list, it sounds like this is a wealthy area. It's not. It's just an old country. We live down a country road. So it's not like some crazy wealthy area. In fact, I think we have the lowest taxes in all of Texas. Maybe that's why. And then, lately, there's been all these car people who've moved in. Chris Casney, which, God, he would be a fascinating interview. Do you know Chris at all?
Yeah, I think I met him a long time. I definitely know who he is. The stuff that he built. I think I follow him on Instagram. That'd be really cool.
So Chris Casney is the most talented person I know. As far as building a car, he can do anything himself, and he does everything himself. Interior, paint and body, the mechanics, everything. And if he doesn't know how to do it, he can learn how to do it within in a crazy amount of time. And I don't understand how he does it. But so we built our shops at the same time using the same metal building company. Mm-hmm. And the metal building company hated me because of Chris Casney. Because Chris would be like, hey, you clocked that hardware wrong. You need to get up there and fix it. And so they would leave his place and come to mine, and our buildings are basically the same. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if they expected me to be the same or what have you. But it's gotten to the point now to where, I started woodworking, and he's crazy master woodworker, right? And every time I'm out there working in the shop, I think, oh, Chris Casney is going to see this, man. I can't, I'm going to have to hide it or I'm going to have to fix it. Yeah. And he's got this, he's fascinating because he's got to be, clinically obsessive compulsive. Mm-hmm. Or he's definitely clinically smart as shit. He's crazy smart. And just the talent, he would be crazy interesting to interview, I think. And he didn't get a lot of press, but I would put any of his cars against anybody's as far as fit and finish and style and everything else. That dude, he lives probably 3 miles from me, less than that as a crow flies. But the country roads are all windy. But I mean, he lives pretty close to me. He's a good dude. But yeah, this little area just outside of Austin, Jimmy lives out here. Lee lived here before he moved back to California. It's a cool little country area where just all these car folks and then otherwise weird folks live.
Yeah, it sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got my gears turning for all the people out of state I got to hit up and call.
I think that conversation alone would be interesting for people here.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully you got enough.
Oh, yeah, man. So I saw. So you've got Lee Pratt's. What year is that? Is it
a 49?
49. Okay. I'm bad with Fords in general.
Yeah.
What else do you have right now? And what are you working on anything new?
Lee Pratt shoebox. I've got my Model A coupe that Tardell built, and then I have my 38 coupe, which is the car that kind of started the Jalopy Journal. And about 6 years ago, I took the 38 apart. Mm-hmm. And the idea was it was sort of half built traditionally and half built to be low. And so Like I took it apart, and Keith was gonna take I had an independent front on it. Keith took that out and put in a straight axle, and then we're like, well, we're under here. We should probably put a 57 Ford 9-inch in it. So we've done that, and it's like I had this crazy small block Chevy in it, and we're gonna put that in a Bonneville car maybe, and instead we're gonna put a blown Y block in this car. So the last few years we've been trying to piece together that motor and just slowly but surely put that car back on the road. But it's behind me right now in jack stands. But yeah, that's it. I've got other stuff in pieces, but that's it as far as complete car.
Cool.
The shoebox was one of those deals. Like, I think I had done feature articles for myself and other publications 3 or 4 separate times on Lee's shoebox. And then he decided to sell it. And I'm like, I mean, I can't imagine someone else owning it.
Yeah.
And I could not afford to buy it at the time, but I didn't have much of a choice, so I bought it.
That's such a cool car.
It's super stressful to own, but I love it.
Well, cool. I suppose, man, I could keep talking to you all day, but I suppose I should let you get back to work eventually.
Right on, yeah.
But, man, thank you so much. This was really fun. I really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Right on. Cool, yeah, it was fun.
Well, all right, that's it. Thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you so much to Ryan for your time. I had a great time recording this one. It really meant a lot. This was pretty cool. And I have some exciting stuff coming up on the podcast. So, subscribe, review, blah, 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 all that stuff that podcasters say. So I'll catch you next time, and we'll see what 2020 holds or some mystical New Year's stuff like that. Thanks.